I've replayed that night in my head more times than I can count, and even now, I hesitate every time I think about saying it out loud. Not because it sounds unbelievable, but because it sounds too ordinary. The kind of thing that shouldn't bother you at all, until it does. At the time, I was living alone in a small apartment on the edge of town. Nothing fancy. One bedroom, a narrow kitchen, and a living room that barely fit a couch and a table. The building was old, but not neglected. Thin walls, outdated fixtures, the kind of place where you could hear your neighbors if you really paid attention. I worked late shifts, so being awake at night was normal for me. Silence never felt strange there. It felt expected. That night started like any other. I got home a little after midnight, dropped my keys on the counter, and went straight to the kitchen to heat something up. I remember checking my phone while the microwave ran, scrolling without really reading anything. I wasn't tired yet, just mentally drained, the kind of exhaustion that makes everything feel slightly distant. When I finished eating, I washed the plate, set it in the rack, and wiped the counter. I'm particular about small routines like that. Even when I'm tired, I like knowing things are where I left them. The apartment felt normal, quiet, still. I locked the door, checked it twice out of habit, and went to the bedroom. I left the hallway light on like I always did, and closed the door halfway. I didn't turn off the living room lamp either. I never liked sleeping in complete darkness. I remember lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about nothing important, just letting the time pass. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but the first thing I noticed was that the apartment felt different. Not loud, not obviously wrong, just unsettled. The kind of feeling you get when you wake up somewhere unfamiliar, even though you know exactly where you are. I listened for a moment, expecting to hear something. Pipes, footsteps, a car outside. But there was nothing. Complete silence. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. It wasn't there. At first I thought I had knocked it off the bed in my sleep. I leaned over, feeling around the floor with my hand, but I didn't touch anything except the cold wood. I sat up and turned on the lamp. That's when I noticed the bedroom door was fully closed. I was certain I'd left it half open. I always did. I even remember the thin line of light from the hallway before falling asleep. Now, there was nothing. Just the door, shut tight. I told myself I must be misremembering. That happens more often than people admit. I picked up my phone from the dresser instead, where I apparently had left it, and checked the time. 3:12 a.m. I sat there for a few seconds longer than necessary, just staring at the screen. Then I got up and opened the bedroom door. The hallway light was off. That bothered me more than the door. I never turned it off at night. Ever. It was one of those habits so ingrained I didn't even think about it anymore. I stood there, holding the doorframe, listening. Still, nothing. I walked down the hallway and flipped the light switch. The living room looked exactly the same as when I'd gone to bed, except for one thing. The couch cushions were shifted. Not dramatically, just enough that I noticed it immediately. I stood there, trying to remember if I'd sat down before bed. Maybe I had. Maybe I'd leaned back, moved the cushion without thinking. That explanation felt reasonable, so I accepted it, even though something about it didn't sit right. I went back to the bedroom and tried to sleep. It didn't work. My thoughts kept circling the same small details. The door, the light, the cushions. Each one was insignificant on its own. Together they formed a pattern I didn't like. Still, I refused to jump to conclusions. Apartments make noise. People forget things. Memory fills in gaps incorrectly all the time. Eventually, exhaustion won. I slept. When I woke up in the morning, everything seemed normal again. Sunlight through the window, the familiar hum of traffic outside. I almost laughed at myself for being uneasy over nothing. But then I noticed the kitchen chair. It wasn't pushed in. That might sound ridiculous, But I knew I hadn't used it the night before. I'd eaten standing up at the counter. I always did when it was late. The chair was pulled back just a few inches, angled slightly toward the sink. I froze, just for a second. Then I did what I'd been doing since the night before. I rationalized it. Maybe I moved it earlier that day and forgot. Maybe I bumped it without realizing. I pushed it back in and went on with my morning. I didn't tell anyone about it. There was nothing to tell. That night, I paid closer attention. I made a point of noticing where everything was before going to bed. The lights, the doors, the position of the furniture. I even checked the lock twice, standing there longer than usual, listening for any sound from the hallway outside my apartment. Nothing happened. I woke up again sometime after 3. This time, I knew exactly why. The living room light was on, not flickering, not dim, fully on. I sat up in bed, my heart racing, listening hard. I didn't hear footsteps, I didn't hear breathing, I didn't hear anything that confirmed my fear or dismissed it. Just silence, thick and heavy. I got out of bed slowly, every movement feeling louder than it should have. When I reached the hallway, I noticed the bathroom door was open. I always kept it closed at night. Always. I stood there trying to convince myself there was a simple explanation I was missing. Sleepwalking, muscle memory, forgetfulness, anything. But deep down, another thought kept pushing its way forward. Whatever was happening wasn't random. Someone or something was interacting with my space carefully, subtly, like they didn't want me to notice too much at once. I turned off the living room light and checked the front door. Still locked. No signs of forced entry. No marks. No damage. That should have made me feel better. Instead, it made me realize something that I hadn't allowed myself to think before. If nothing was broken and no lock was forced, then whatever was changing those small details didn't need to rush. And that was the moment I understood why that night stayed with me, because even then, standing alone in my apartment, I couldn't honestly say that what was happening was impossible, just that it wasn't normal. After that night, my routine stopped being automatic. I didn't realize it at first. It happened in small adjustments. I started double-checking things that never used to matter. Lights, doors, windows. I'd leave the apartment in the morning, walk halfway down the stairs, then come back up just to make sure the door was locked the way I remembered locking it. I told myself it was stress or lack of sleep. But deep down, I was trying to regain a sense of control. The next few nights were quiet, almost deliberately so. Nothing out of place, no lights on, no doors moved. I began to relax again, which in hindsight feels like the worst part. It was as if whatever had been happening wanted me to settle back into comfort. Then, on the 4th night, I noticed something that I couldn't dismiss as memory or habit. I kept my keys on a small hook by the door, always. I'd had that habit since my first apartment. Keys never went anywhere else. When I came home that night, the hook was empty. For a brief moment I stood there holding my bag, convinced I must still have them in my hand. I checked my pockets. Nothing. I checked the bag. Still nothing. Then I heard the faint clink of metal. It came from the kitchen. Slowly I walked in and saw my keys resting on the counter, placed neatly beside the sink. Not tossed, not dropped. Aligned. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at them, waiting for my brain to supply a logical explanation. Maybe I'd put them there without realizing it. Maybe I was more tired than I thought, but I knew that wasn't true. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I stayed in the living room with the lights on, pretending to watch something on TV while listening to every sound the building made. Pipes knocked. Someone upstairs walked across their floor. A car passed outside. Normal noises, all of them. Nothing that explained the quiet precision of what was happening inside my apartment. In the morning, I considered calling someone, a friend, my sister, anyone. But how would I explain it without sounding paranoid? Nothing had actually happened. No confrontation, no threat. Just objects moving in ways that suggested intention. So instead, I bought a small camera. It wasn't anything sophisticated, just a cheap indoor security camera I could connect to my phone. I told myself it was for peace of mind. I set it up in the living room, angled so it could see the front door, the couch, and part of the kitchen. I didn't tell anyone about it. It felt embarrassing, like admitting weakness. That night, nothing happened. The next night, nothing again. By the third night, I started to feel foolish. I even thought about taking the camera down. That was when I noticed something odd in the footage. Not movement, but gaps, short ones. 30 seconds here, a minute there. The camera didn't shut off entirely. It just skipped. No error messages, no alerts. I contacted the manufacturer. They blamed my Wi-Fi. That explanation didn't sit well with me, but I accepted it anyway. I wanted to believe there was a technical reason. I adjusted the router, repositioned the camera, and went on with my life until the night I woke up with the unmistakable feeling that someone was standing near my bed. I didn't hear breathing. I didn't hear footsteps. I just knew. My eyes opened slowly, and for a split second I thought I saw a shape near the doorway. Then I blinked and it was gone. The hallway light was off. The door was closed. I stayed perfectly still, listening. Nothing. In the morning, I checked the footage. The camera showed the living room exactly as I'd left it, except for one thing. At 3:14 a.m., the couch cushion shifted slightly, as if someone had sat down and then stood back up. There was no visible person, just the movement. 30 seconds later, the feed skipped. I watched that clip over and over, trying to convince myself it was a glitch. Maybe the cushion had settled, maybe it was a compression issue, but cushions don't shift inward on their own. That was the day I stopped sleeping in my bedroom. I started locking the bedroom door from the inside and sleeping on the couch, keeping the camera feed open on my phone all night. I barely slept. When I did, I dreamed of small, quiet movements I could never quite see. A week later, I came home to find the camera unplugged. Not knocked loose, not damaged, just unplugged. I stood there in the doorway, my heart pounding, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. The apartment smelled the same, looked the same. But the message was clear enough that I didn't need to interpret it. Whatever was happening knew about the camera. That night I packed a bag and left. I stayed at a motel across town, telling myself it was temporary. Just until I could think clearly. Just until I figured out what to do. I slept better there than I had in weeks, even with the unfamiliar sounds and thin walls. 2 days later, I went back to the apartment in the middle of the afternoon. Everything was exactly where it should have been. Too exactly. The couch cushions were perfectly aligned. The chairs were pushed in evenly. The keys were back on the hook. The bedroom door was half open, the hallway light on. It looked staged. I moved out the following weekend. I never filed a report. I never confronted anyone. There was no proof of a crime, no evidence of forced entry, no footage that showed a person's face, just patterns and absences. Years have passed since then. I live somewhere else now, a newer building, better locks, more neighbors. I've never experienced anything like that again. But every now and then, I'll wake up in the middle of the night and feel that same sense of quiet awareness. The feeling that my space is being observed, not invaded, respected even. And that's the part I never tell anyone. Because whatever happened back then didn't feel violent or chaotic. It felt careful, like someone was making sure I knew they could be there without ever needing to be seen.